Deep Dive Podcast by the Boca Raton Tribune.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. We take the headlines, peel back the layers, and really look at the deeper currents shaping things. Today, we're focusing on a story that's really caught the nation's attention. A tragic event, really sobering, but it gives us a critical lens to look at a much bigger, more complex debate. I'm talking about the assassination of conservative activist Charlie Kirk at Utah Valley University back on September 17th, 2025. And the charge is now against Tyler Robinson, who's 22. This deep dive isn't just about this one case, though. We're using it as a launchpad, really, to explore the whole intricate landscape of capital punishment in the U.S. and, well, specifically in Utah. Our mission here is to dig into the trends, the changing opinions, the practical stuff that defines the death penalty today. I'm always fascinated by how one single awful incident can shine a light on such a huge national conversation. I think you'll find what we uncover pretty thought-provoking. Okay, so let's try and unpack this. At the core of this legal process, beyond the terrible event itself, is this decision by Utah prosecutors. They're seeking the death penalty for Tyler Robinson. What exactly are the specific legal reasons they've given for wanting to go down that road?
Right. The legal basis has to be really specific. Robinson is charged with aggravated murder. Now, for people maybe less familiar, aggravated murder basically means a killing done under circumstances that make it, well, particularly severe or heinous. That's what makes it eligible for the death penalty where it's allowed.
Okay.
In this specific case, the prosecutors have laid out a few reasons. First, they're arguing Robinson put other people at great risk of death during the attack itself, the chaos, the danger created.
Right.
Second, they argue he specifically targeted Kirk because of his political expression. That's a key aggravating factor suggesting a kind of premeditation beyond just murder. And third, and this is particularly awful, they highlighted that children were actually present and witnessed the homicide. That adds another layer of severity and trauma.
So it's not just the killing, it's the whole context around it. And if, hypothetically, Robinson is found guilty, what's the next step? It isn't an automatic death sentence, is it?
No, not at all. Exactly. If he's convicted of aggravated murder, the whole process moves into what's called a separate penalty phase.
Okay.
And during that phase, his legal team gets a really critical chance to present what they call mitigating factors to the jury.
Mitigating factors? Like what exactly?
Well, these are things that could potentially lessen his perceived blame or argue against the death penalty, even if he's found guilty. So, for instance, maybe a history of severe childhood trauma or significant mental health issues that might have influenced his actions, maybe even just a lack of a prior criminal record. The defense aims to give the jury a fuller picture, hoping they might choose a life sentence instead of death.
That makes sense. So the jury really holds the final say here. It's not just guilty or not guilty, but this huge secondary decision, too. And I seem to remember there's some variation in how juries decide this across different states.
You're absolutely right. Yeah, in most death penalty cases in the U.S., it's the jury that imposes the sentence. And this only happens after someone's been convicted. Typically, the jury's decision has to be unanimous. Everyone has to agree.
Unanimous, okay.
But there are a couple of, notable exceptions. Like in Florida, only 8 out of 12 jurors need to agree on death. In Alabama, it's 10 out of 12.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, but for most states, that requirement for unanimity really highlights just how serious it is to ask a jury to make such a final, irreversible decision.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit from this specific case, though it's obviously the backdrop. Let's look at Utah's wider relationship with capital punishment. It's kind of unique, isn't it? Utah seems to have this pivotal place in this story, especially being one of the very first states to bring back executions after that big Supreme Court ruling in '76.
It really does.
Yeah.
And looking at Utah's specific actions back then tells you a lot. So the Supreme Court lifted the nationwide ban on executions in 1976. And less than a year later, January 77, Utah becomes the first state to actually carry one out. That was Gary Gilmore, executed by firing squad.
Right, the firing squad. That really captured attention.
It absolutely did. It was huge news nationally, signaling, capital punishment was back in America. Now, since then, Utah has executed 7 prisoners in total, which, okay, 7 is significant, but it's actually below the median for the 34 states that have used the death penalty since '76.
Below the median, how does that compare to, say, a state like Texas?
Well, that's where the contrast is stark. Texas, which is often central to this discussion, has executed 595 prisoners in that same period.
595, wow.
Yeah. It's by far the leader. So Utah's 7 looks very different in that context. And right now, capital punishment is still technically allowed in 27 states. It's this real patchwork across the country.
7 versus almost 600. That's an incredible difference. It really puts Utah's usage, or perhaps restraint, into perspective. What about the number of people actually on death row right now? Does Utah's smaller execution number mean a smaller death row too?
It does, absolutely. Utah has one of the smallest death row populations nationally. Just 8 people currently awaiting execution.
Only 8.
Only 8. Compare that to California, which has the largest 585 inmates on death row there.
585.
Yeah. And what's maybe even more interesting is states like Oregon and Wyoming. They technically allow the death penalty, it's on the books, but they currently have 0 prisoners on death row.
0. So it's legal but not being used or sought.
Pretty much. Or at least no one is currently sitting there under that sentence.
Yeah.
It really shows not just the different sentencing rates, but also how incredibly long this whole process is. Inmates can be on death row for years, often decades. Mandatory reviews, endless appeals, big delays in scheduling executions. It's an incredibly long and complex legal journey.
Decades. Okay, and this next part, this always gets me when we talk about Utah. The method. Most people think lethal injection, right? But Utah has this other method that always makes headlines.
Right. Lethal injection is Utah's primary method now, like most states. But yes, there's that unique historical element with the firing squad. Utah banned the firing squad as a new option back in 2004.
Okay, banned it in 2004.
And here's the really specific part. There's this provision. Convicts who chose the firing squad before the 2004 ban, they are still eligible for it.
So they were grandfathered in, essentially.
Exactly, like Ralph Menzies. He was convicted for a murder back in 1986. He chose the firing squad years ago. His execution by firing squad was actually scheduled for just recently, early September this year.
It was. What happened?
Well, the Utah Supreme Court blocked it just before it happened. They sent his case back to a lower court for more review. So the legal fight continues, even down to the method itself.
Wow, so it's this kind of legacy option. How rare is the firing squad nationally?
Oh, exceptionally rare. Since the Supreme Court brought back capital punishment in '76, only Utah and South Carolina have actually used a firing squad for an execution.
Just 2 states.
Just 2. It really underscores how distinct Utah's approach has sometimes been in this, very sensitive area.
Which brings us to the bigger picture, really. We've talked about Utah's specific history, its methods, but how does all this fit into the national mood? Public support for capital punishment. It definitely feels like opinions have been shifting quite a bit across the U.S.
Oh, absolutely shifting. And pretty dramatically, actually.
Yeah.
Right now, U.S. public support for the death penalty is hovering near a 50-year low. It's around 53%.
53%. So still a majority, but barely.
Barely. And what's really key, according to a 2024 Gallup poll, is the age breakdown. A majority of adults under 43 actually oppose it.
Oppose it. Under 43, that's significant.
It's huge. That generational shift is critical for understanding where things might be headed. We're also seeing this clear geographic concentration. Last year, there were 25 executions nationwide. About 3/4 of those, roughly 75%, happened in just 4 states: Alabama, Texas, Missouri, and Oklahoma.
Just 4 states doing most of the work, so to speak.
Exactly. It shows that while it's legally allowed in many places, the actual use of it is becoming much more localized, less widespread.
That's a fascinating split. Older generations may be more supportive, younger adults shifting away. How does Utah fit into that national picture? Is it following the trend, or is it still a bit of an outlier with higher support?
Well, there was a state report back in 2017 in Utah. At that time, it did find support for the death penalty there was higher than the national average.
Okay, so higher back then.
Higher than, yes. But even in that same report, it clearly noted that support was declining, especially among adults aged 44 and younger.
Ah, so mirroring the national age trend, even if overall support was higher.
Exactly. So while Utah might have had stronger historical backing, it's definitely not immune to these bigger shifts in public opinion. It's caught up in the same current, you could say.
Even with those shifts in decliner support, it's important we acknowledge the other side, too. There's still a significant chunk of the public, and many in the legal field, who see capital punishment as essential for ultimate justice. What are some of the main arguments you hear from proponents? Why do they believe it's necessary?
That's a really vital point for balance, absolutely. The arguments for the death penalty usually center on a few core ideas. One big one is retribution, the sort of eye for an eye idea. that for certain incredibly heinous crimes, the ultimate penalty is the only truly just response. Proponents feel it gives victims' families a sense of finality that maybe life in prison doesn't.
Right, the justice and finality argument.
Another is deterrence, the idea that having the death penalty stops other people from committing similar capital crimes. Now, the evidence on whether it actually works as a deterrent is, frankly, widely debated and pretty inconclusive.
Yeah, I've heard that debate is ongoing.
Constantly. And a third key argument is incapacitation. Basically, ensuring that a convicted murderer can absolutely never harm anyone again. The death penalty is seen as the only 100% guarantee against that.
Okay. So retribution, deterrence, incapacitation, those are the main pillars for supporters?
Generally, yes. These are deeply held beliefs about justice and public safety for many people, whether you agree with the arguments or not.
Absolutely. And understanding those arguments helps frame why this debate is so persistent, even with declining numbers, which leads to maybe the most practical question: why the decline? We know public opinion is shifting, but we also saw that massive drop in actual death sentences. Over 300 a year in the mid-90s, down to just 26 last year. Connecting this to the bigger picture, what are the nuts and bolts reasons driving this change?
Yeah, it's a dramatic drop. And legal experts usually point to several overlapping factors. First off, prosecutors themselves are just seeking the death penalty less often, period.
Why is that?
Well, they're weighing the huge costs, the incredible complexity of these cases, and frankly, the lower odds now of actually getting a death sentence upheld through all the appeals. It becomes a strategic calculation.
Okay, so prosecutors are becoming more selective.
More selective, maybe more pragmatic. Second, even when prosecutors do seek it, juries are just more reluctant to impose it than they used to be. Public opinion plays into that, sure, but jurors also seem to be looking more closely at the evidence, at those mitigating factors we talked about. They're scrutinizing things more.
So it's not just feelings changing, there's a very real, practical, almost financial element creeping in, like a cost-benefit analysis within the justice system itself.
Absolutely. The financial argument is huge. You can't ignore it.
Yeah.
That 2017 Utah study we mentioned, it found that pursuing a death penalty case adds, on average, about $1.5 million in extra costs for the state.
1.5 million extra, compared to seeking life.
Yes, compared to seeking a life sentence. Think about why. Much longer, more complex investigations, more expert witnesses needed for both prosecution and defense. Pretrial motions pile up. Jury selection alone can take months instead of days.
Wow.
And then you have the multi-layered appeals process that can literally go on for decades. Every single stage costs the state serious money. That $1.5 million is a massive burden on taxpayers and state budgets.
That's a really staggering figure. And it isn't just about the dollars, is it? You mentioned the burden on victims' families earlier. Can you expand on that? That feels like such a crucial, often overlooked human cost.
It's incredibly important and often heartbreaking. The sheer length of these death penalty cases can be an immense burden, not just financially for the state, but emotionally, profoundly. On the victims' families, many families find themselves just reliving the absolute worst trauma of their lives over and over again for years, sometimes decades, with every appeal, every court date, every bit of media attention.
Constantly reopening the wound.
Exactly. The pursuit of the death penalty can actually prevent them from finding any sense of closure or finality. So we are seeing, increasingly, situations where victims' families themselves actually prefer a plea bargain.
A plea bargain for life instead.
Yes, for life without parole. It means they can avoid the gut-wrenching emotional toll of a long, high-profile trial and those seemingly endless appeals. It offers a quicker, though still incredibly painful resolution.
Right.
We saw discussions around this factor, for instance, in that tragic University of Idaho student's murder case back in 2022. Avoiding putting the families through a drawn-out capital trial was apparently a significant consideration.
That's a perspective you don't always hear emphasized. The cost to the families in terms of time and trauma. Well, this deep dive, starting with the Charlie Kirk case but broadening out, has been really eye-opening. So many layers I hadn't fully grasped before. We've looked at Utah's pretty unique history, its methods like the firing squad, how its local trends sort of mirror but also differ from the national shifts, and the strong arguments that still exist for capital punishment. And we've really unpacked those practical costs too, the financial burden, the human toll that seem to be driving this big decline in death sentences across the country.
It really does raise a big question, doesn't it?
All
Something
right.
for you, the listener, to think about as you process all this. Given everything we've talked about, the falling public support, especially among younger people, the huge financial costs, the incredibly long legal battles, the impact on families, how might this landscape of capital punishment keep changing in the years ahead? Will we see more states just move away from it completely? Or will it kind of remain this deeply embedded, but maybe rarely used part of the justice system, reserved for only the most extreme cases?
Exactly. It's such a complex issue, isn't it? With really profound implications for justice, for policy, for society. We hope this deep dive has given you some food for thought, encouraging you to reflect on these shifts and what they could mean moving forward. Thanks for joining us.